You're still upstairs? The caterers are short-handed, Kendra. My mother's voice slammed through the hallway before I finished fastening the last gold button on my Navy service dress blue jacket. I looked at myself one more time in the mirror. Every ribbon sat exactly where regulations required. My collar devices were aligned. The shoes reflected enough light to show the edge of the bedroom window behind me. My interview package rested inside a brown leather folder beside my cover. My Pentagon promotion board was scheduled for 1 p.m., and I had already planned every minute between leaving the estate and walking through the security checkpoint. Then my mother called again. I don't have all day. I grabbed the folder and headed downstairs. The Linwood estate had been hosting charity galas and political fundraisers long before I was born. This morning, it had transformed into the stage for my younger sister Darcy's engagement brunch. Florists crowded the foyer with white peonies. A string quartet tuned their instruments in the ballroom. 2 photographers were already arguing over camera angles before the guests even arrived. Not one person noticed my uniform. My mother did. She looked me up and down with the same expression people use when they discover a coffee stain on an expensive tablecloth. Absolutely not. I stopped. What? You cannot walk around looking like that. I glanced at my jacket. It's the Navy service dress blue. I know exactly what it is, she snapped. And it looks painfully dull next to Darcy's engagement theme. I almost laughed. My uniform had represented nearly 15 years of service. To her, it clashed with flower arrangements. She shoved a white catering apron into my hands. The servers are missing 2 people. Put this on. I have to leave soon. You'll leave when the guests are seated. My interview is at the Pentagon. She waved a dismissive hand. You sit behind computers. Missing 30 minutes won't start World War III. If only she knew how many disasters never happened because people like me did our jobs quietly. I never corrected her anymore. Trying to explain classified work to someone determined not to understand was like arguing with airport security about shampoo bottles. She always won because facts were never invited into the conversation. The front door opened. Maryland State Senator Russell Hayden walked in with his wife. Behind them came executives from defense consulting firms, Annapolis business owners, retired admirals, and people who measured their own importance by how loudly others greeted them. My mother instantly changed personalities. Welcome, we're so honored you could come. Her smile disappeared the second she looked back at me. Kitchen, now. I walked in without another word. The catering manager looked exhausted. I appreciate the help, he whispered. One of my staff called out sick. No problem. He handed me a tray holding 12 champagne flutes. Each one had been arranged with military precision. That part, at least, made sense. As I reached the dining room entrance, Darcy floated toward me wearing a designer ivory dress that probably cost more than my first car. She smiled, not at me, past me, toward the photographers. Then she lowered her voice. Try not to look miserable. I'm carrying champagne. I meant your face. I wasn't aware I was performing. You always are. Before I could answer, Gavin Albright stepped beside her adjusting custom gold cufflinks. He looked me over for exactly 2 seconds. I thought your mom was joking. About what? I figured someone with a Pentagon interview would look more important. Darcy laughed. I keep telling everyone she's basically an office clerk with a security badge. I smiled politely. You should probably let your guests decide whether they're thirsty. Neither of them caught the joke. That happened a lot. I walked into the dining room. Conversations overlapped with clinking silverware and carefully practiced laughter. People accepted champagne without making eye contact. One guest handed me his empty coffee cup because he assumed I worked for the catering company. I took it anyway. The actual server beside me quietly mouthed, "Sorry." I shrugged. None of this mattered. In another few hours, I'd be sitting across from officers who cared about operational decisions instead of centerpiece colors. Or at least that was the plan. Because there was one item inside the leather folder I refused to let out of my sight for long. My Navy Common Access card. Most people think it's just an ID. Mine wasn't. Without it, I couldn't access the Pentagon interview area. I couldn't authenticate my credentials. I couldn't enter secure systems tied to my assignment. And attached inside that same credential sleeve was something almost nobody outside my command even knew existed. If anything ever happened to it, the response wouldn't begin with an awkward phone call. It would begin with federal investigators. I checked to make sure the folder was still tucked beneath my arm. Good. Still there. for now. I had no idea that before the afternoon was over, that small piece of government-issued plastic would turn an engagement celebration into the biggest federal crime scene Annapolis had seen in years. But the reason it disappeared had nothing to do with bad luck. It had everything to do with someone inside my own family. That truth wouldn't fully reveal itself until much later, and when it did, nobody in that dining room would ever forget what they witnessed. This opening incorporates the required immediate conflict opening, first-person narration, human dignity focus, and the Part 1 curiosity loop centered on the Navy credential to maximize viewer retention, while following the storytelling and SEO guidance you specified. My mother suddenly marched across the marble floor before I could reach another table. There you are. She grabbed my left sleeve hard enough to wrinkle the freshly pressed fabric. What are you doing? I asked quietly. She raised her voice so everyone nearby could hear, showing up in this unpolished, boring clerk's aesthetic when photographers are everywhere. Do you want Darcy's engagement pictures to look like a recruiting commercial? Several guests looked over. Someone chuckled. My mother pulled at my sleeve again. Take that tray. A larger silver tray waited beside the dessert station, loaded with nearly 24 full champagne glasses. It weighed enough that most guests wouldn't volunteer to carry it. She pushed it toward me. Earn your place today. I set my leather folder carefully on the kitchen counter just inside the service doorway, just for a minute, just long enough to carry one tray. I took one slow breath in, held it. 4 seconds, exhaled, 4 seconds, box breathing. The same technique I'd used before briefings that affected lives. The same technique I used now because losing control would only give everyone exactly what they expected. So I lifted the tray, squared my shoulders, and walked back into the dining room as if nothing had happened. I shifted the weight of the silver tray onto my left arm and stepped around a cluster of guests debating yacht memberships as though they were discussing national security. Champagne? A woman wearing enough diamonds to pay off a mortgage accepted a glass without looking at my face. Thank you, dear. Another guest pointed toward an empty flute. Can you clear that? I smiled. Of course. Nobody recognized me. That was nothing new. Most of the work I'd had done throughout my career only mattered because nobody ever knew it happened. I collected empty glasses while conversations drifted through the ballroom. I heard Gavin's next contract could hit $20 million. Darcy has such wonderful taste. Priscilla really kept this estate alive after her husband passed. That last sentence almost made me laugh. Kept it alive? No. Someone else had. Just not the person standing proudly beneath the crystal chandelier accepting compliments. 6 years earlier, after my father died, I met with an estate attorney in Baltimore at 9:30 on a Thursday morning. The numbers were brutal. The Linwood estate carried overdue tax bills, deferred maintenance, and a commercial bridge loan that matured in less than 60 days. The total shortfall came to $182,417.26. My mother never saw those documents. She didn't want to. She wanted reassurance, not reality. I already knew I couldn't openly transfer large sums into the family account. Questions would follow. My assignments, deployment incentives, and classified retention bonuses couldn't become neighborhood gossip in Annapolis. So my financial advisor recommended something cleaner, a blind trust. Every month, money quietly flowed into that trust. From there, scheduled distributions landed in the family estate account without my name attached. Hazard pay, hostile fire compensation, retention incentives, classified performance awards, dollar after dollar, month after month, enough to keep the lights on, enough to stop foreclosure, enough to preserve the house my father loved. My mother believed wise investing had saved everything. Darcy believed the family had always been wealthy. Neither one had ever asked where the money originated. Over 6 years, they withdrew more than $185,000 from that same trust to support a lifestyle that looked impressive on social media and even better at country clubs. Designer handbags, weekend trips to Napa, private shopping events, luxury furniture, professional photographers. Every receipt came from money they assumed appeared by magic. I balanced another tray while a waiter whispered, "Need help? I'm good." He looked relieved. So am I. We both laughed. It was probably the most honest conversation I'd have all morning. Across the ballroom, my mother raised a champagne glass. I just want to thank everyone for celebrating Darcy and Gavin today. Applause filled the room, she continued. My youngest daughter has always known how to build meaningful relationships. I nearly missed a guest reaching for another drink. Youngest daughter. She hadn't mentioned me once. Not surprising. According to her version of reality, I spent my career scanning ID cards somewhere inside a gray government building. If anyone asked what I actually did, she'd usually answer first. Kendra has one of those desk jobs with the Navy. That explanation was easier than admitting she had never cared enough to find out. A retired admiral standing near the buffet frowned as he looked at me. For a second, I wondered if he recognized the uniform. Instead, he asked, "Excuse me, where are the crab cakes?" I pointed toward the next serving station. He thanked me and walked away. Close enough. Darcy glided across the room with practiced elegance, stopping every few feet for another photo. Every smile looked effortless until she reached me. Her expression changed instantly. She lowered her voice. "Stay over here. I'm serving this side of the room." "No." She glanced toward the photographers. "Your depressing shadow keeps ending up in the background." I looked behind me. "I cast a shadow now, you know what I mean." "Actually, I don't." She smiled through clenched teeth. "People are here to celebrate successful family members." There it was, the familiar reminder that, in her eyes, I occupied some lower floor of the family hierarchy. I adjusted the tray. "If you're worried about pictures, maybe stop staring at me." She leaned closer. "You always make everything feel serious." I carried champagne. "You carry awkwardness," I almost answered. Instead, I remembered something my father used to say. Never waste your best argument on someone who already decided they're right. The photographers called Darcy's name. She immediately switched back into influencer mode. Big smile. Perfect posture. Not a trace of irritation. Watching her transform that quickly would have impressed a Hollywood acting coach. Gavin intercepted me before I reached the kitchen. He held out a wine glass with lipstick still on the rim. "Take this." I accepted it. Then he didn't let go. "You know," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "it's nice you're helping out today." I was asked. Everyone should contribute. "I agree," he smirked. "Especially when you're living off the family name." That almost made me stop walking. Living off the family name? The irony was so complete, it bordered on comedy. He had absolutely no idea the mortgage payments, insurance premiums, and monthly trust distributions keeping this estate afloat had never come from inherited wealth. They came from me, from deployment after deployment. From nights inside to secure operations centers where 12-hour shifts routinely became 20. From places where incoming alerts could change an entire mission in less than 30 seconds. From danger nobody here would ever see. I released the wine glass into the bus tub. "Anything else?" He picked up another dirty glass from the buffet. "Sure." He placed it directly into my hand. "Earn your keep." Several guests laughed politely, not because it was funny, because wealthy people often laugh when someone else becomes the entertainment. I simply nodded. "If that helps you enjoy your brunch, I'm happy to carry another glass." His smile faded. People expecting a fight rarely know what to do when they don't get one. As I turned toward the kitchen, I caught sight of my leather folder exactly where I had left it on the counter. For a brief second, I felt relieved. My Navy Common Access card was still inside. My passport was still inside. The secure credential sleeve that represented years of trust, responsibility, and sacrifice was still waiting for me. I had no reason yet to believe that the most dangerous person in the house wasn't wearing a weapon, wasn't sitting in a government office, and wasn't some foreign intelligence officer. She was my own sister, smiling for another engagement photo, while quietly deciding that destroying my career would make her morning just a little brighter. I handed the last champagne flute to a guest, checking his watch, and quietly stepped through the swinging kitchen door. The noise from the ballroom faded behind me. I glanced at the clock mounted above the pantry shelves. 11:15. Perfect. If I collected my folder now, I'd still have enough time to change out of the apron, drive to the Pentagon, park in the south parking lot, clear security, and arrive outside the promotion boardroom with a comfortable margin. I never liked cutting military schedules close. The people deciding whether I was ready to wear commander rank certainly wouldn't appreciate it either. I walked straight to the section of counter besides the industrial coffee machine. Empty. I stopped. Maybe I had left it closer to the prep station. I checked. Nothing. I looked beside the stack of linen napkins. Nothing. I crouched to see if it had slipped behind the trash cans. Nothing. The brown leather folder that had been sitting there less than an hour earlier had completely disappeared. My stomach tightened. Not panic. Training. The moment something critical goes missing, your brain automatically starts building timelines instead of excuses. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Last confirmed location, kitchen counter, beside the coffee machine, approximately 10:32. No reason to move it, no reason for catering staff to touch it, no reason for anyone else to even notice it, unless someone intentionally picked it up. I searched again, slower this time, inside the warming cabinet, behind the boxes of sparkling water, under folded tablecloths. Nothing. A dishwasher looked over. You lose something? A leather document folder. He shook his head. I haven't seen one. Server overheard us. I thought it belonged to one of the photographers, but I didn't see anybody take it. I thanked both of them and continued searching. Every passing second mattered. Inside that folder wasn't just paperwork. My Navy Common Access card, my passport, my travel orders. Most importantly, the secure cryptographic credential sleeve that accompanied my current assignment. People outside my field imagine those credentials as fancy passwords. They aren't. They're controlled government assets. Every movement is documented. Every authentication leaves a record. If one disappears unexpectedly, the assumption isn't carelessness. The assumption is possible compromise. Which meant that if I couldn't account for it immediately, my promotion interview would become the least important event in my day. The investigation would come first. I checked every cabinet a second time. Nothing. My breathing became shorter. Not because I was losing control, because I was calculating consequences. No CAC, no Pentagon access, no SIF entry, no promotion board, potential suspension of credentials, mandatory incident reporting, security interviews, damage assessment. Every possibility stacked neatly in my mind like dominoes waiting for one push. I forced myself to stop moving. Fast searches become sloppy searches. Sloppy searches miss obvious details. I planted both hands on the stainless steel counter and took one controlled breath. 4 seconds in. Hold. 4 seconds. Out again. The room became quieter, not physically, mentally. That's when I noticed fresh water droplets leading from the counter toward the hallway connecting the kitchen to the family wing. Somebody had carried something through here while the ice buckets were being refilled. The droplets disappeared before reaching the door. Interesting. Before I could think further, someone entered carrying a large black trash bag. Darcy. She wore the same flawless smile she'd been showing guests all morning. The moment she noticed me standing there, that smile shifted into something smaller. Sharper. What are you doing hiding in here? She asked. I'm looking for my folder. What folder? Brown leather. You may have seen it on this counter. She pretended to think. Nothing. Then she shrugged. Nope. I watched her carefully. People lying often talk too much. Darcy preferred for something different. She acted amused. I had important documents inside, so dramatic. My Navy ID was in it. She rolled her eyes. Kendra, you seriously need to relax. I'm asking a simple question, and I'm giving you a simple answer. She lifted the trash bag slightly. I haven't seen your precious government folder. I held her gaze. You've been in the kitchen several times today. So, did you move anything from this counter? She laughed. Listen to yourself. I'm listening. You sound paranoid. A catering employee passed behind us. Darcy immediately softened her voice. My sister always gets like this when work stresses her out. The employee gave us an awkward smile before disappearing through another doorway. As soon as he left, Darcy smiled again. Only now there wasn't any warmth behind it. I think that desk job is finally getting to you. My job has nothing to do with this. I disagree. She folded her arms. You government people spend all day acting like every piece of paper is a national emergency. It wasn't paper. Oh, right, she smirked. A plastic card. It's government property. You probably misplaced it. I didn't. You probably forgot where you left it. I know exactly where I left it. She tilted her head. Memory problems happen when people obsess over boring jobs. I studied her face. She wasn't guessing anymore. She wasn't trying to help. She was steering the conversation away from one conclusion. That told me more than her words ever could. Darcy? What? If someone intentionally removed that credential, this isn't a family argument anymore. She laughed loud enough for 2 caterers to hear. There you go again. Then she made a small circle beside her temple with one finger. Government desk job hysteria. The words landed exactly as she intended. To anyone listening, I sounded irrational. She sounded patient. It was a performance. And she had rehearsed it well. I didn't answer. Silence often makes people reveal more than questions. She waited. When I refused to react, something flashed across her expression. Disappointment. She wanted me angry. She wanted raised voices. She wanted witnesses describing the unstable older sister who ruined an engagement brunch over a missing badge. Instead, I simply asked one final question. "You're certain you haven't seen it?" She smiled. "Positive." Then she picked up the trash bag again and walked away without looking back. I watched her disappear into the hallway. The feeling settling in my chest wasn't fear anymore. It was certainty. My folder hadn't been misplaced. It hadn't been accidentally thrown away. Someone had deliberately removed it. And the only person in this house who seemed strangely entertained by that fact was my own sister. For the first time that morning, I wasn't thinking about making it to the Pentagon by 1 o'clock. I was thinking about something much worse. Somewhere inside this house, an active Department of Defense credential with classified cryptographic access was no longer under my control. That wasn't just sabotage. If I was right, someone had crossed a line that federal law takes far more seriously than family ever could. I walked out the back service entrance before anyone could stop me. The kitchen door closed behind me, cutting off the music, the laughter, and my mother's carefully rehearsed performance. My shoes pressed into the damp gravel lining the driveway behind the estate. For the first time all morning, nobody was talking to me. Nobody was telling me to smile. Nobody was pretending I didn't exist. I reached my government-issued SUV and checked my watch. 11:22. 38 minutes had passed since I set my leather folder on the kitchen counter. Enough time for someone to move it. Not enough time for it to disappear by accident. I unlocked the driver's door, climbed inside, and closed it quietly. The silence felt different, not peaceful, focused. Military training teaches you something civilians rarely experience. The moment panic starts asking questions, procedure starts answering them. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text Darcy. I didn't report the credential missing. Not yet. Because reporting a possible compromise before exhausting immediate recovery procedures could trigger automatic containment protocols. Once that happened, events would move far beyond my control. I reached behind the passenger seat and pulled out a slim black equipment case. Inside sat my government-issued encrypted laptop. No commercial logo, no decorative stickers. Just a serial number, a security label, and hardware built for one purpose. I pressed my thumb against the biometric reader, access granted, the encrypted operating system loaded, 2 authentication prompts, 1 hardware token, 1 12-character passphrase I had changed 43 days earlier. The secure desktop appeared. I opened an internal asset management application that almost nobody outside classified programs would recognize. Every officer trusted with certain categories of cryptographing material received additional accountability measures. Most people assumed the common access card itself contained a tracker. It didn't. That would create unnecessary security risks. The tracking capability was built into the credential sleeve issued with specific classified assets. It remained completely passive unless activated through authenticated government systems. Most officers never needed to use it. I had hoped I never would. I entered my authorization credentials. A warning filled the screen. Passive asset location request reason for activation. I selected. Possible unauthorized possession. Another confirmation window appeared. I accepted. The system paused, 3 seconds, 5, 8. Then a digital map opened. A gray circle centered on the Linwood estate. Searching, searching. My heartbeat remained steady. Either the sleeve would answer, or it wouldn't. If it didn't respond, the situation had just become much worse. A soft tone sounded through the speakers. Connection established. A small green dot blinked onto the map. I stared at it. It wasn't somewhere down the highway. It wasn't sitting inside a garbage truck. It wasn't moving toward Washington. It hadn't left the property. I zoomed in. The estate footprint filled the display. Another zoom. The first floor. Another. The second floor. The software refined the signal within a few feet. My stomach dropped. Master bedroom. I zoomed again. The signal stopped moving. Exactly one location. Not beside the bed. Not inside a dresser. Inside a travel trunk. The softwares displayed additional positioning data. Estimated container dimensions matched approximately 30 inches wide. Signal obstruction detected. Metal hardware present. The room suddenly felt much colder. I already knew which trunk. Darcy's oversized Louis Vuitton travel case. She showed it off constantly. She once spent 15 minutes explaining to guests why it was an investment piece. Apparently, today it had become storage for stolen federal property. I leaned back without taking my eyes off the screen. So it wasn't an accident. She hadn't picked up my folder thinking it belonged to someone else. She hadn't moved it to protect it from spilled drinks. She had carried it upstairs, opened her bedroom, unlocked her trunk, placed it inside, closed the lid, locked it again. Every step required another decision. Every decision made this more deliberate. My hands had motionless on the steering wheel. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger clouds observation. Observation wins investigations. I replayed the morning in chronological order, my mother forcing me into the dining room. The tray, leaving the folder on the kitchen counter. Darcy appearing almost immediately afterward. Her repeated attempts to keep me away from photographs. Her insistence that I stay busy. Her performance in the kitchen. Government desk job hysteria. It fit together too cleanly. This hadn't been spontaneous. It had been planned. Whether the goal was humiliating me, making me miss my promotion board, or something even worse, I couldn't yet say. But one fact no longer required speculation. My credential had been intentionally concealed. I opened the asset information panel. Credential status. No unauthorized electronic authentication detected. Good. At least nobody had attempted to use it. Yet. That single word lingered in my mind. Yet. Because possession alone was already serious. The credential sleeve also contained a secure cryptographic key token associated with compartmented operational access. The token itself remained encrypted. Without proper authentication, it was useless. But federal law didn't measure danger by whether someone succeeded. It measured danger by unauthorized possession. Someone outside authorized channels now controlled a protected government asset. Someone who had absolutely no legal reason to touch it, and that someone shared my last name. I thought about my father. He believed family disagreements ended around dinner tables. He believed honesty eventually solved everything. He would never have imagined one daughter deliberately placing another in the middle of a national security incident. The betrayal wasn't financial. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't even professional. It was something deeper. Darcy hadn't simply hidden an ID card because she wanted me embarrassed. She had interfered with federal security accountability out of jealousy. She had turned years of trust, background investigations, operational discipline, and sworn responsibility into a childish game. I looked back toward the estate. Luxury cars filled the circular driveway. Guests laughed beneath white event tents. Photographers captured another round of smiling engagement portraits. Inside that beautiful house, people were celebrating love, success, and family. Only I knew that, less than 70 feet away from the buffet, a locked designer trunk contained an active Department of Defense credential that should never have left my possession. I closed the laptop carefully. One decision remained. I could walk back inside, accuse Darcy in front of everyone, and hope she admitted what she'd done. Or I could treat this exactly the way I'd treat any other potential compromise involving classified assets, professionally, methodically, and without giving the person responsible a single extra minute to destroy evidence. I rested my hand on the laptop for another second before opening the driver's door. The cool air hit my face, but I stayed where I was. There was no value in rushing. There was value in remembering exactly who I was before I walked back into that house. Because my family had spent years convincing themselves I was nothing more than a forgettable government employee. The truth had never belonged to them. 18 months earlier, I walked through 3 reinforced security doors beneath Fort Meade and surrendered every personal electronic device before entering a compartmented operations center with no windows and no outside distractions. Nobody called me Kendra down there. The badge clipped to my workstation displayed my clearance level. The operators around me called me one thing: Siren. I took my seat at console set. Intelligence feeds filled 6 monitors in front of me. Satellite imagery, electronic warfare reports, maritime tracking, signals intelligence. Live, the room never became loud. People working under pressure rarely shouted. They spoke in short sentences because every unnecessary word delayed a decision. At 21:47, one of the communications specialists looked toward me. "We've lost Team Atlas." I turned toward his display. A Green Beret reconnaissance team operating from an unmarked naval platform had gone silent while moving through contested waters in the South China Sea. Mission leader, Major Jackson Croft. The last transmission contained only fragments. Taking fire, Navigation compromised. Can't separate real signals. Then nothing. Electronic jamming had swallowed everything else. One analyst quietly muttered the sentence nobody wanted to hear. They're blind. The command supervisor ordered every available communication pathway opened. Nothing. Commercial satellites couldn't reach them. Military frequencies were overwhelmed. Directional relays produced static. Every option disappeared one after another. A senior coordinator looked across the operations floor. We'll need authorization before attempting alternative routing. That authorization meant paperwork, multiple command approvals, legal review, time, too much time. Meanwhile, somewhere hundreds of miles away, a 12-person team sat inside hostile waters with no reliable navigation and no communications. I looked at the electronic interference pattern spreading across my display. Something didn't fit. The enemy focused on blocking known military frequencies. They weren't hunting everything. They were hunting what they expected us to use. I opened another database, one almost nobody touched anymore. Archived maritime communication surveys, decades-old civilian navigation experiments, abandoned relay studies. Most people considered them obsolete. I didn't. Sometimes the oldest road is the only one nobody remembers to block. A lieutenant noticed what I was doing. Those channels were never operational. I know. They aren't approved. I know. The operations supervisor stepped behind me. What exactly are you building? A bridge. Using what? Something no one's looking at. He folded his arms. You don't have authorization. I kept typing. I understand. You need to wait. I checked another propagation model. No, waiting wasn't an option anymore. Every delay increased chance that Team Atlas would drift deeper into hostile waters or directly into another ambush. I generated a temporary communications protocol using fragments from 3 abandoned frequency studies and a modern encryption layer I had been developing for maritime contingency operations. It had never been tested in combat. It had never been formally approved. But mathematically, it should work. The supervisor spoke again. Lieutenant Commander, stand by. I entered one final command. Siren protocol initialized. The room became silent. One analyst whispered, "You actually did it, not completely." For 6 endless seconds, nothing happened. Then static. A burst of interference. Another. Finally, a voice broke through. Atlas actual. Weak. Broken. Alive. I leaned toward the microphone. Atlas actual, this is Siren. Do not acknowledge location. Listen only. Another burst of static answered. Good enough. I uploaded a compressed navigation package through the temporary channel. The system calculated a narrow escape corridor between hostile patrol routes using real-time electronic interference instead of avoiding it. If Major Croft followed the route precisely, the same jamming field trapping his team would also hide their movement. It was risky, but every safer option had already disappeared. I spoke slowly. Attain current speed for 4 minutes. Turn to heading 083 on my mark. Ignore every external signal except this channel. Silence. Then one word. Copy. Those 4 minutes felt longer than entire deployments. Operators around me stopped pretending to work on anything else. Every monitor tracked the same blinking icon. One wrong turn, one unexpected patrol, one navigation error. The signal disappeared again. Someone behind me quietly said, "We lost them." I didn't answer. 32 seconds later, the icon moved, not randomly, exactly where it should. Another minute, then another. The electronic interference map shifted. Team Atlas had entered the corridor. One by one, hostile tracking systems lost their lock. The jamming field became their cover instead of their prison. An analyst actually laughed. I can't believe that worked. Neither could I. 43 minutes later, Major Croft's team reached friendly waters. Only then did I finally lean back in my chair. The secure line activated one last time. Croft's voice sounded exhausted. You saved 12 people tonight. You got them home. No, he paused. You gave us the road home. There was another brief silence before he continued. I don't know when I'll repay this. You don't owe me anything. I disagree. His voice became steady again. If anyone ever tries to bury the truth about what you did or who you are, you call me. The line disconnected. We never spoke about that operation again. Official reports listed the extraction as a successful communications recovery. My name appeared nowhere, exactly as intended. Back at the estate, my mother still introduced me as the daughter who shuffled papers for the Navy. She had no idea that somewhere inside special operations, experienced operators still remembered the call sign Siren. because it meant somebody had answered when every other channel went silent. I looked back toward the ballroom windows where guests continued raising champagne glasses beneath expensive chandeliers. What was happening inside that house was unbelievable on its own. But while I stood there, I couldn't help thinking about another case we've covered where family betrayal spiraled into something even darker. If you want to compare just how far people can go when greed takes over, keep an eye on the top right corner of your screen between minutes 45 and 55. That story may change the way you see this one. I slipped the encrypted laptop back into its case. Major Croft had made me one promise 18 months earlier. At the time, I hoped I'd never need to find out whether he meant it. Standing in my family's driveway with a federal security breach unfolding inside the house, I realized I was about to get my answer. I locked the SUV, slipped the encrypted laptop back into its compartment, and walked toward the estate without changing my pace. The digital clock on the dashboard had read exactly 12. 1 hour remained before my promotion board. That hour no longer belonged to my career. It belonged to the truth. The music from the ballroom drifted through the open doors as I stepped inside. A violinist was finishing a familiar classical piece, while servers replaced empty appetizer trays with seafood towers and carved prime rib. No one noticed me at first. That suited me perfectly. I passed the catering station without reaching for another tray. A young server tried to hand me a fresh platter. "Can you take this too?" "No," he blinked. "Oh." It wasn't rude, it was final. For the first time that morning, I wasn't there to serve anyone. I walked straight through the center aisle. Conversations gradually faded as people noticed the woman in the navy uniform heading toward the head table with the kind of posture that usually meant something official was about to happen. Table 4 sat beneath an enormous crystal chandelier. My mother occupied the center seat like she was hosting a state dinner. Darcy sat beside Gavin, smiling as another photographer captured close-ups of her engagement ring. I stopped directly in front of them. Nobody spoke. Darcy's looked up first. Her smile tightened. "Oh," she laughed lightly. "I thought you left. I need my folder." She shrugged. "I already told you. I'll ask once more." I looked directly into her eyes. "Return my credential." The smile disappeared. "I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about." "You do." Guests at nearby tables began turning their chairs. Gavin leaned back comfortably. "Kendra, what? You're making a scene." "No." I kept my eyes on Darcy. "I'm ending one." My mother set down her champagne flute. "Kendra, this is not the time." It became the time when government property disappeared. Several guests exchanged confused looks. Darcy laughed louder this time. "There it is." She looked around the table as if inviting everyone into a private joke. "I told you she's been acting strange all morning." I didn't answer. She stood slowly, placing one hand against her chest. "Kendra, you're honestly scaring me." Her voice became louder. "What folder? What credential?" I remained still. "My Navy credential. I've never touched it. Return it." "I don't have anything." Heads turned throughout the ballroom. Conversations stopped one by one. Even the string quartet lowered their instruments. Darcy's eyes suddenly filled with tears. Real tears. Or at least convincing ones. "I don't understand why you're doing this." Her voice trembled. "I've been trying to help you all morning." Someone at another table quietly whispered, "Is she okay?" Another guest answered, "I heard she works one of those stressful government jobs." Darcy seized the opportunity immediately. "She's been obsessed with this badge all day." She looked toward the guests. I think the pressure finally got to her. I spoke calmly. "Darcy." She ignored me. "I've been telling Mom she's exhausted." She wiped beneath one eye. "She barely sleeps." The lies came effortlessly. Every sentence carefully designed to sound compassionate while quietly destroying my credibility. I finally said, "You know exactly where my credential is." She stared at me in disbelief. "Oh my God." Then she actually stepped backward. "Are you threatening me?" "No." Everyone heard that. Nobody had. But that didn't stop her. She covered her mouth dramatically. "I can't believe you're accusing your own sister." Gavin stood beside her. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders while staring at me with practiced disappointment. "This isn't healthy, Kendra." "I agree. You need help." "I need my government credential." He shook his head. "You've convinced yourself somebody stole it." "I know somebody did." He sighed loudly. This is exactly what happens when people spend too much time locked inside government offices. Several guests nodded as though that explained everything. The irony almost made me smile. If they knew where I'd actually spent the last several years, they wouldn't have survived 5 minutes in those environments. My mother pushed back her chair. The microphone for welcoming speeches still rested on its stand nearby. She picked it up. I silently wished she wouldn't. She did anyway. The feedback squealed across the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, every face turned toward her. I sincerely apologize. She looked directly at me. My older daughter has been under tremendous stress. The room remained silent. She continued, "Unfortunately, she's having another episode." A murmur spread across the tables. My mother pointed toward the entrance. "Kendra," her voice sharpened, "you are embarrassing this family." I stood exactly where I was. I asked for one thing. You've accused your own sister of theft. I asked her to return government property. Darcy began crying harder. I didn't take anything. My mother slammed one hand against the table. "Enough." The microphone amplified every word. "You disgrace us, Kendra." The sentence echoed through the ballroom. Several guests visibly flinched. She took one step toward me. "Get out of my house before I have you arrested for harassment." Nobody spoke. 50 influential guests watched what they believed was an unstable government employee unraveling during her younger sister's engagement celebration. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked annoyed. A few openly judged me. One woman quietly shook her head as though she pitied my family. None of them knew they were watching the wrong victim. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't tell them about the tracking signal. I didn't explain the classified credential. I didn't reveal that a locked travel trunk upstairs contained federal property. None of that would matter yet. Evidence always speaks louder than emotion. I simply looked at Darcy. She couldn't hold eye contact for more than 2 seconds, just long enough for me to notice the smallest change. The confidence she'd worn all morning had developed tiny cracks, not because she felt guilty, because she knew I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew, completely. She glanced over the staircase for less than a heartbeat before forcing herself to look back at me. That single mistake confirmed everything the tracking system already had. She knew exactly where my credential was. The ballroom stayed painfully quiet. People expected shouting. Instead, I stood with my hands resting naturally at my sides, my breathing slow and controlled, my heartbeat steady from the same tactical box breathing that had carried me through far more dangerous situations than this. Room temperature. That's what one instructor used to call it. No matter how chaotic the room became, stay room temperature. I watched my mother. I watched Gavin. Finally, I watched Darcy one last time. Then I spoke in the same calm voice I'd used during life or death operations. This is your last opportunity to return it voluntarily. No threats. No raised voice, just a statement. Darcy swallowed almost invisibly. Then she looked straight at me and said, "I have absolutely nothing to return." I gave a single nod. Understood. I turned toward the front entrance. Everyone assumed I was finally leaving in defeat. No one realized I was walking away because the next people entering that house wouldn't be there to argue with my family. They would be there to recover a compromised Department of Defense asset. I had taken only 3 steps toward the front entrance when the sound reached me. Not voices, not music. Heavy boots, striking polished stone with perfect rhythm. The front doors of the estate swung inward hard enough to rattle the brass handles against the walls. Every conversation stopped. The violinist lowered his bow in the middle of a note. 4 uniformed federal military police officers entered first, moving with disciplined precision. Their sidearms remained holstered, but their posture made it clear they hadn't come to enjoy champagne or congratulate an engaged couple. A 5th figure walked between them. Major Jackson Croft. Even out of uniform, most Green Berets carry themselves differently from everyone else. Croft wasn't out of uniform. His combat decorations rested neatly above his left pocket. His Special Forces tab sat above the shoulder patch. Every movement was controlled, efficient, and completely unaffected by the dozens of stunned faces turning toward him. The room collectively forgot how to breathe. Someone whispered, "Military police?" Another answered, "What are they doing here?" A retired Navy captain near the back stood up automatically, years of habit. When men like Croft entered a room unexpectedly, experienced service members paid attention. My mother did exactly the opposite. She smiled. Not because she understood what was happening, because she assumed every important-looking person naturally belonged at her party. She hurried across the ballroom with both hands extended. "Oh, Major, welcome." Croft didn't slow down. "My name is Priscilla Linwood." Nothing. "We're honored to have someone of your distinguished service here." She reached out to shake his hand. He walked past her without even turning his head. Her hand remained suspended awkwardly in the air. For perhaps the first time in years, someone had looked straight through Priscilla Linwood as if she simply didn't exist. The color drained slightly from her face. She tried again. There must be some misunderstanding. Still nothing. Croft's attention never shifted. Neither did the military police officers. Their eyes systematically scanned exits, stairways, guests, and sightlines with the practiced discipline of people securing a location instead of attending a social event. Gavin stepped in front of Darcy almost instinctively. "What exactly is going on?" No one answered him. Croft continued walking, straight toward me. The ballroom had become so quiet I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning system above the chandeliers. Every guest watched the decorated Special Forces officer approach the woman who, only moments earlier, had been publicly described as an unstable government clerk. I hadn't moved. The serving tray still rested against my left hip. It suddenly felt absurd. Crystal champagne flutes in one hand, years of classified service in the other. Croft stopped exactly one pace in front of me. Neither of us spoke. His boots shifted once. Then came the sound every service member in the room recognized instantly. His heels snapped together, sharp, precise. Without hesitation, Major Jackson Croft raised his right hand in a flawless military salute. Not casual, not symbolic, official. Every angle was exact. Every movement carried complete respect. The entire ballroom froze. A retired Marine colonel, standing near the windows, unconsciously straightened his own posture. Two veterans among the guests instinctively removed their hands from their pockets. Nobody expected what they were seeing. Certainly not my mother. Croft's voice carried clearly across the room. "Lieutenant Commander Linwood." I returned the salute. "Major Croft." Only after I lowered my hand did he lower his. No one around us seemed capable of speaking. Darcy looked from him to me, then back again. Confusion replaced every trace of confidence she'd worn all morning. My mother finally managed to find her voice. "Kendra." She laughed nervously. "You never told us you knew each other." Croft looked at her for the first time. His expression didn't change. "We do." That was all he said. No explanation, so smile. Just 2 words. Gavin attempted to recover the moment. "I'm Gavin Albright." Croft didn't acknowledge him. Instead, he looked directly at me. "Were you able to maintain visual accountability of the affected location after your report?" I confirmed the signal before returning inside. "Any unauthorized access observed?" "Negative." "Any attempt to voluntarily surrender the asset?" I provided that opportunity. Croft nodded once. "Understood." Every sentence sounded foreign to the guests listening. To me, it was simply operational language. Priscilla frowned. "Asset?" She forced another laugh. "I'm afraid everyone is being a little dramatic over a misplaced identification card." One of the military police officers finally spoke. "It is not a misplaced identification card, ma'am." His tone remained professional. "It is an active Department of Defense credential." Several guests exchanged uneasy glances. Another officer quietly positioned himself near the staircase leading to the family bedrooms. Darcy noticed immediately. Her breathing changed. Tiny. Almost impossible to detect unless someone had spent years watching people hide stress behind smiles. I noticed. Croft noticed too. He didn't look at her. He simply continued speaking to me. "Your initial notification indicated probable unauthorized possession." "Correct." "You subsequently verified location through approved accountability measures." "Correct." He accepted both answers without another question. That alone told me everything. He trusted my assessment completely. My mother stepped forward again. "This has gotten completely out of hand." She pointed toward me. "My daughter has been under tremendous psychological stress." Several guests nodded. Priscilla continued. "I think she's misunderstood something." Croft finally turned toward her fully. His eyes remained calm. "Mrs. Linwood." "Yes?" "Lieutenant Commander Linwood's judgment has repeatedly been trusted with matters affecting the lives of American service members." The room became even quieter. "I am not here because she misunderstood something." Every word landed like solid steel. "I am here because I believe her." Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody whispered. The entire atmosphere had shifted. Less than 15 minutes earlier, I had been the embarrassing older sister carrying catering trays. Now every influential guest in the ballroom watched a decorated Special Forces officer publicly affirm his confidence in me without the slightest hesitation. I noticed something else. Darcy had stopped crying. Fear had replaced performance. She glanced toward the staircase again, only for a fraction of a second, then back toward Gavin. He subtly shook his head. Too subtle for almost anyone else, not subtle enough for people trained to notice silent communication. Croft caught it too. I saw it in the smallest movement of his eyes. He didn't react outwardly. He simply spoke one calm sentence. Military police, secure the interior exits. 4 officers moved immediately. No shouting, no rushing. Just disciplined precision. The engagement party had officially stopped being an engagement party. It had become an active federal security response. The 4 military police officers spread through the ballroom with quiet precision. Nobody tried to leave. Nobody tried to stop them. The confidence that had filled the room all morning had disappeared without anyone announcing it. Crystal glasses remained half full on white linen tablecloths. A photographer slowly lowered his camera, apparently realizing that whatever happened next belonged in a federal report, not an engagement album. Major Croft took one measured step closer to me. His voice remained calm, professional, loud enough that every person in the ballroom could hear every word. Lieutenant Commander Linwood. Yes, Major. DCSA has confirmed a major security incident involving your assigned credential. You could almost hear 50 people trying to understand what that sentence meant. Croft continued. Your classified cryptographic credential generated an unauthorized network interaction while located on this property. The room froze. We are here to recover the protected asset and preserve all related evidence. No dramatic pause. No raised voice. Just facts. Sometimes facts hit harder than anger ever could. A state senator sitting near the front slowly set down his champagne glass. Across the room, one of the defense contractors frowned. He understood exactly what classified cryptographic credential meant. His expression changed immediately. My mother looked back and forth between us. I don't understand. Croft acknowledged her without changing his tone. Ma'am, an active Department of Defense credential assigned to Lieutenant Commander Linwood has been unlawfully removed from her control. She laughed nervously. This is about an identification badge? No, it isn't? No, ma'am. He paused only long enough to make sure everyone was listening. It is a controlled federal credential associated with classified operational access. Silence, absolute silence. The words settled over the ballroom like concrete. The same guests who had spent the last hour smiling politely while I carried champagne now looked at me differently. Not because my uniform had changed, because suddenly it meant something. My mother blinked twice, but she pointed toward me. Kendra works in office. I do. She looked relieved for half a second. Then I finished the sentence. I work in operational intelligence and tactical cybersecurity. Several guests turned toward me. Nobody smiled anymore. Croft spoke again. Lieutenant Commander Linwood currently maintains security responsibilities requiring immediate federal response in the event of credential compromise. A woman near the back whispered, "Oh my God." Another guest quietly asked, "Lieutenant Commander." The retired admiral I had unknowingly directed toward the crab cakes earlier stared at me for several seconds before quietly saying, "I knew I recognized the uniform." My mother looked genuinely confused. "Commander?" I answered her calmly. "Lieutenant Commander." "You never told me. You never asked." That landed harder than I intended. Not because it was cruel. Because it was true. For years she had introduced me as the daughter with the boring government desk job. She never once asked what I actually did. Never once asked why I disappeared for months. Never once asked why I couldn't discuss work over dinner. It had simply been easier to invent a version of me that fit her world. Croft reached into a document case carried by one of the military police officers. He removed several pages. "Mrs. Linwood." "Yes?" "We have legal authority to recover government property reasonably believed to be located within this residence." Her eyes widened. "You have a warrant?" "We have judicial authorization associated with a federal security incident." She looked at Darcy, then back at Croft. "There has to be some mistake." Croft didn't respond. Instead, he asked me a question. "Lieutenant Commander, did you personally attempt voluntary recovery before initiating escalation?" "Yes." "Did you provide the individual in possession an opportunity to surrender the credential?" "I did." "Was that opportunity declined?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Thank you. That exchange mattered." It established a simple fact. I hadn't called armed personnel into my mother's home because I was angry. I had followed procedure, exactly as I had been trained. Darcy suddenly stepped forward. This is insane. Her voice shook now. Real fear had finally replaced performance. I don't even know what everybody's talking about. Croft looked at her for the first time. Ms. Linwood, yes? Nobody has accused you of anything in this room. She opened her mouth, then stopped. Because he was right. Until that moment, no one had publicly named her. She had identified herself simply by reacting. Gavin quickly interrupted. My fiancé has nothing to do with any government issue. Croft shifted his attention toward him. Sir, yes? Then you have nothing to be concerned about. Gavin didn't answer. One of the military police officers quietly spoke into his shoulder microphone. Interior secure. Another responded from upstairs. Second floor secure. The words echoed through the ballroom. Second floor. Darcy visibly stiffened. I noticed it. Croft noticed it. So did the officer standing near the staircase. My mother looked ready to panic. This is my home. Croft nodded respectfully. I understand. You can't just send soldiers through my house. They are federal law enforcement personnel assigned to assist in credential recovery. But why? His answer came immediately. Because Lieutenant Commander Linwood's responsibilities involve national security. No one in the room had another argument after that. A defense consultant quietly leaned toward another guest. I've only seen this kind of response once before. The other man whispered back, if DCSA came personally, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone with even a passing familiarity with federal security understood that agencies rarely deployed personnel like this over routine administrative mistakes. Something significant had happened. My mother slowly turned toward me. The pride she had always reserved for Darcy wasn't there. Neither was anger, only disbelief. You've been doing all of this? I nodded once. My job required me not to discuss it. She looked as though she wanted to say something, perhaps apologize. Perhaps ask questions she should have asked years earlier. Nothing came out. For the first time in my life, my mother's opinion no longer carried any weight. Not because I hated her, because I finally understood something. Respect earned through service never depends on recognition from people who refuse to see it. Across the ballroom, 50 influential guests had watched me become a waitress. Then they watched a decorated Special Forces officer salute me. Now they were watching an entire federal response unfold because my security responsibilities demanded it. The story they believed all morning had collapsed completely. I wasn't the forgotten daughter living in Darcy's shadow. I was the officer every person in uniform had come to protect. Major Croft folded the warrant back into its case. Then he looked toward the staircase. Recovery team. 4 military police officers answered in unison. Sir, proceed to the identified location. Without another word, they turned and began climbing the staircase. Every footstep carried them closer to the locked Louis Vuitton trunk upstairs, and every step carried Darcy closer to the moment when lies would no longer matter, because evidence was about to speak for itself. The first officer disappeared into the second-floor hallway without making a sound. The other 3 followed, each moving with the kind of discipline that comes from rehearsing the same procedures hundreds of times. Nobody downstairs dared to speak above a whisper. The only sound left in the ballroom was the faint ticking of the grandfather clock my father had rebuilt by hand 20 years earlier. Darcy stared at the staircase. She wasn't blinking anymore. Gavin quietly reached for her hand beneath the table. She squeezed it so hard, her knuckles turned white. Major Croft stood beside me without saying a word. He didn't need to. The investigation had reached the point where evidence would speak for itself. 30 seconds passed, then 60. Finally, a voice came over one of the military police officers' shoulder radios. Recovery team to command. Croft pressed the transmit button. Go ahead. Located one locked Louis Vuitton travel trunk matching signal location. Darcy inhaled sharply. The officer continued, executing warrant. Silence. Then another transmission. Lock defeated. A few seconds later came the sentence that ended everything. Primary government credential recovered. Every eye in the ballroom turned toward Darcy. She looked as though every ounce of color had been drained from her face. Croft answered calmly, confirm serial verification. Another pause. Confirmed. Credential serial matches Lieutenant Commander Linwood's accountability record. There was no room left for denial. My Navy credential had not been misplaced. It had not been accidentally moved. It had been hidden inside my sister's locked travel trunk. One of the guests quietly whispered, "My God." Another simply lowered his head. The retired admiral closed his eyes for a moment, as though understood exactly how serious that discovery was. The radio crackled again. Additional evidence located. Croft looked up. Describe. A removable flash drive concealed beneath folded clothing. He didn't react outwardly. Secure it. The officer paused, requesting permission to conduct preliminary identification. Approved. A few seconds later came another report. The device exterior is labeled with the initials GA. Every head turned toward Gavin. He immediately stood. I don't know what they're talking about. Nobody answered him. The officer upstairs continued. We also located handwritten notes containing login references associated with Lieutenant Commander Linwood. My stomach tightened, not because I was surprised, because the situation had just become much larger than stolen credentials. Croft spoke into the radio. Package all electronic evidence. Maintain chain of custody. Copy. Gavin took one step backward. This is ridiculous. Croft finally looked directly at him. Mr. Albright, I've never even been upstairs today. One of the military police officers near the staircase quietly said, Security cameras will help establish everyone's movements. Gizinen stopped talking. The silence lasted only a moment. Another transmission arrived. Command, preliminary review complete. Croft acknowledged it. Proceed. The officer's voice became even more measured. The recovered flash drive contains Department of the Navy logistics bid documents marked procurement sensitive. A defense contractor sitting near the front table quietly muttered, Oh no, the officer continued. Multiple files appear to have been copied from restricted acquisition systems. Croft's expression never changed. Any indication of credential misuse? Affirmative. The ballroom seemed to shrink around us. We have evidence suggesting repeated attempts to access procurement records using credentials assigned to Lieutenant Commander Linwood. I slowly closed my eyes for one brief second. So that had been the real objective. This had never been about ruining my promotion interview. Missing the interview would simply have removed me from the picture long enough for someone else to exploit my identity. Darcy hadn't stolen my credential because she hated my career. She had stolen it because Gavin needed access to information he could never legally obtain himself. The engagement brunch, the distractions, the photographers, the catering, every detail suddenly made sense. My mother looked at Gavin in complete disbelief. You said you worked in logistics. I do. You said everything was legitimate. It is. His voice cracked. I didn't, Croft interrupted him. The evidence will determine that. The lead recovery officer appeared at the top of the staircase carrying a sealed evidence bag. Inside, I immediately recognized my leather folder, my Navy credential, my passport, the secure cryptographic sleeve. A second evidence bag contained the flash drive. Both bags remained sealed. The officer descended the staircase and handed them directly to Croft. Chain of custody maintained, sir. Croft examined the serial numbers. Everything matched. He turned toward me. Lieutenant Commander, yes, your credential has been recovered intact. I nodded. Thank you. He handed the evidence to another officer for processing before facing Darcy and Gavin. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. Darcy Linwood. She took 2 stumbling steps backward. No, you are being detained pending investigation into the unlawful possession of protected federal property. She shook her head violently. I didn't know what it was. You intentionally concealed it. I was just helping Gavin. The words escaped before she realized what she had admitted. Gavin's eyes widened. Darcy. She covered her mouth. Too late. Croft looked toward Gavin. Gavin Albright. He remained frozen. You are under arrest for suspected federal bank fraud, identity theft, unlawful procurement of protected government information, and conspiracy relating to national defense information. I want a lawyer. You'll have that opportunity. 2 military police officers stepped forward simultaneously. Heavy steel handcuffs clicked around Gavin's wrists. The sharp metallic sound echoed across the marble floor. His champagne glass slipped from his hand. It struck the floor and exploded into dozens of glittering pieces. Nobody moved. Darcy screamed, No! No! This isn't happening. She tried pulling away. Another officer secured her wrists behind her back. She began crying uncontrollably. Mom! Her voice echoed through the ballroom. Mom! Make them stop! Priscilla rushed forward instinctively. You can't arrest my daughter, Croft answered quietly. Ma'am, step back. She's innocent. Step back. She didn't understand. Darcy sobbed harder. Mom! Please! Priscilla sobbed from Darcy to Gavin, then finally toward me. Everything changed in her face. The pride, the arrogance, the certainty. Gone. She crossed the ballroom as quickly as she could. Then, in front of every politician, every business executive, every socialite she had spent years trying to impress, she fell to her knees. Kendra, her voice broke, please. She reached toward me. Please help them. I looked down at her. For years I had watched her choose appearances over truth, Darcy over fairness, status over family. Now the consequences had finally arrived, and suddenly she remembered I was her daughter again. They're your family. She was right, they were, and family had been given every opportunity. I had asked for my credential quietly. I had asked again. I had offered a chance to return it voluntarily. Instead, they mocked me, lied about me, tried to convince an entire room that I had lost my mind. Now they wanted mercy after refusing responsibility. I met my mother's eyes. My face didn't change. No anger, no satisfaction, no triumph. Just the same calm expression that had carried me through operations where emotions only made difficult situations worse. Flat steel. I can't save anyone from the choices they made. No one spoke. The only sound left was Darcy crying as the military police escorted her and Gavin toward the front entrance. The dynasty my mother had spent years pretending to build hadn't been destroyed by me. It collapsed under the weight of its own lies. I watched the transport vehicle carrying Darcy and Gavin disappear through the estate gates before I looked back at the ballroom one last time. Nobody returned to the tables. Nobody reached for another glass of champagne. The engagement brunch had ended without anyone announcing it. Flowers still decorated every table. The string quartet quietly packed away their instruments. Photographers zipped expensive cameras into padded cases without taking another picture. Some of the guests avoided looking at me altogether. Others nodded respectfully as they walked past. The retired admiral who had mistaken me for catering staff earlier stopped in front of me. I owe you an apology, Lieutenant Commander. You don't. I judged you before I knew who you were. I smiled faintly. You judged the situation you were shown. He shook my hand firmly. I hope your promotion board knows exactly what kind of officer they're getting. I appreciate that. He left without another word. One by one, the ballroom emptied. The only people remaining were federal investigators documenting evidence, and my mother, still sitting alone in the same chair where she had introduced Darcy as the family's greatest success. She looked 20 years older than she had that morning. When she finally spoke, her voice barely carried across the room. What happens now? I answered honestly. That depends on the courts. I meant. She looked around the nearly empty estate. Us. There wasn't an easy answer. Maybe there never had been. I reached into the inside pocket of my uniform jacket and removed my phone. The attorney handling the Linwood Family Preservation Trust answered on the second ring. Mr. Ellison speaking. It's Kendra Linwood. Lieutenant Commander, is everything all right? No. I glanced toward my mother. I need to terminate the trust immediately. He remained silent for a moment. Are you certain? Yes. The monthly distributions? End them today. He took a slow breath. I'll prepare the authorization. I also want written notice delivered to every listed beneficiary. I understand, and remove my future contributions permanently. I'll begin processing. Everything within the hour. Thank you. The call ended. My mother stared at me. What trust? I looked at her. The one that's been paying this estate's bills. She frowned. I don't understand. You will. I removed another folded document from my leather folder, the latest trust statement, monthly distribution, $8,500 mortgage, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities, 6 years, every single payment. My mother read the first page. Then the second. Her hands began trembling. This, she looked up at me, this can't be yours. It is. No. It always was. She searched the pages desperately as though a different answer might suddenly appear. I know what you thought. I thought your father's investments, they were gone. The estate would have been foreclosed. She slowly sat back down. So all these years, yes, the realization settled over her piece by piece. The charity galas, the renovations, the landscaping, the social status she had guarded so fiercely. Every bit of it had survived because of the daughter she had dismissed as a boring government clerk. Tears filled her eyes again. I never knew. No. I would have thanked you. I wasn't looking for thanks. She lowered her head. I should have known, maybe. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then I opened my phone one last time. First contact. Priscilla Linwood, block, second. Darcy Linwood, block, third. Gavin Albright, block, simple, permanent. not out of revenge, out of necessity. Some relationships stop being healthy long before people admit it. Major Croft approached quietly. Transportation is waiting. I nodded. I'm ready. As we walked toward the front entrance, I paused beside the small oak cabinet near the doorway. My father's restored dog tag still rested exactly where he always kept it whenever he came home from reserve duty. I picked it up. The chain felt familiar against my hand. He used to tell me something whenever life became complicated. Protect your name by protecting your choices. I finally understood what he meant. Outside, the afternoon air felt surprisingly calm. The same driveway where guests had arrived in luxury sedans now held a military transport vehicle. One of the military police officers opened the rear door. Before climbing inside, Major Croft stopped beside me. I never expected we'd meet again like this. Neither did I. He looked toward the estate. You gave them every chance. I know. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. Coming from him, those words carried more weight than praise ever could. The vehicle pulled away from the estate. I didn't look back, not because I was angry, because there was nothing left behind that belonged to me anymore. 23 minutes later, the Pentagon came into view. The familiar security checkpoints, the rows of American flags, the officers and civilian personnel moving with purpose. At exactly 1 p.m., the transport stopped outside my assigned entrance. An escort handed me my recovered leather folder. The evidence seal had been replaced with official documentation confirming the credential had been restored to my custody. Everything inside was exactly where it belonged. I straightened my jacket, adjusted one ribbon that had shifted slightly, checked my cover, then stepped onto the sidewalk. No one there knew what my morning had looked like. No one needed to. I walked toward the entrance exactly as scheduled. Not because nothing had happened, because I refused to let what happened define where I was going. Before entering the building, I stopped for one slow breath. The same box breathing that had steadied me in operations, investigations, and family betrayal. Only this time it felt different. Lighter, like setting down weight I had been carrying for years without realizing it. I looked toward the enormous building in front of me. My future wasn't waiting inside because I came from the right family. It wasn't waiting because someone finally believed me. It was waiting because every difficult choice I had made when nobody was watching had quietly built the person standing there. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that dignity isn't something another person can hand you or take away from you. People can misunderstand your work, question your motives, or even betray your trust. None of that changes who you become through your own choices. Real strength isn't staying silent because you're afraid. It's staying calm because you know the truth doesn't need panic to survive. Family can give you roots, but character decides the direction you grow. Protect your integrity before your reputation, because integrity is what remains when every false story finally falls apart. I adjusted my cover one last time and walked through the Pentagon doors without looking back. Before you leave, take a look at the story waiting for you on your screen. It's one of the channel's most unforgettable family betrayals, and after everything you witnessed today, you'll understand why so many viewers watch it all the way through and come back to it again.